they rely on people like ourselves to deliver the training they need for their people. Actually, ADAS, so all this technology, is in entry-level vehicles now. We're seeing $26,000 brand new vehicles have the technology. What that means is actually becoming part of the apprenticeship. You know, maybe when I was an apprentice, the first thing I pick up is a spanner. The first thing apprentices pick up now is a computer, to be honest. You really need to be on top of your game, particularly while it's in concept now. In 3 or 4 years, it'll be commonplace. So you need to keep your finger on the pulse, how industry is evolving.
Marcello, thanks very much for joining us on the Motoring Chronicles. Great to have you here again. I know you've been a guest before, but not lovely to see you again. A bit different this time. Instead of talking about the SEMA show, which you went to a year ago, talking about automotive industry training. So you're the director of the MTA Institute. Can you tell me a little bit about the Institute, what it is?
Sure.
I know it's an RTO, but could you expand on that a little bit and who you service, number of trainers, all that sort of stuff?
100%. Thank you, John. Thanks for having me again. So certainly as a director, I'm responsible for the training organisation, the registered training organisation. So MTA Institute's been around since 1997. And in that time, we started, with a small number of students, a few hundred. And to date, there's probably around 3,000 students on the books, which is significant growth. I think probably the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen quite a significant growth. So 2020, and COVID was probably the instigator. There was a little bit of uncertainty with industry in terms of apprenticeships, but we saw shortly after sort of the lockdowns ended, end of 2021, the numbers just skyrocketed. And there's probably a few reasons for that. Certainly supply chain for new vehicles. So there was older fleet. So people were saying, hey, we need technicians, we need apprentices. So the numbers went through the roof. So we were sitting at about 2,000. So from that point, it went to 3,000. So it's a massive growth, 50% growth in a very short period. And we had some growth pains in terms of that, servicing our students. Yeah. So we had, it was about 40 odd trainers. Now we're up around the 50 odd trainers. Wow. So we've had to obviously create capacity to service industry in terms of the apprenticeships and traineeships that we deliver. In terms of the products, we start from really entry level, so pre-employment products. So there's like pre-vocational, for example. At the moment, we've got 15, 16 young unemployed students that are doing a pre-vocational course. So it's like a introductory type program. Yeah. They're here for 5 weeks. They get, it's really quite practical in terms of our delivery. We have a fully simulated workshop. So the aim is when they walk into our workshop under the training banner, they'll go into a workplace and go, oh, this is very familiar. So we try to simulate as best as possible. So there's the entry level products. Then we have our normal traineeships and apprenticeships. So these students are employed with employers around the state. So from, the New South Wales border all the way to Cairns, Mount Isa, Emerald. So we've got a fair bit of reach in terms of our capability and where our trainers are located. So we have apprentices and trainees throughout the state. So we don't employ them. So we're not a group training. We're the training provider. So industry talk to us, engage us to deliver training services. We're funded by the state government. The government pays us to deliver a service on their behalf. Okay. So that's pretty much a macro view of what we do in terms of the apprenticeship training.
But the breadth of training, it's not just like, so we've got someone who wants to be a mechanic. Correct. That's what we do. It's quite a broad range of.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we try to frame it as start of life, end of life, and anything in between, or that supply chain. So we do some introductory stuff in terms of new car, some sales and bits and pieces like that. Then we've got the full repair. So from motorcycles to paint, panel, electrical, light vehicle, heavy vehicle, agricultural, plant. So there's every part of automotive, because typically automotive is cars.
Yeah.
Is the perception, but yeah, it's a lot greater than that. And things like parts interpreting. So it's not a hands-on technical trade, but certainly enables all the other trades, because you don't have parts, you don't have workflow. So so even that sort of thing in terms of parts sales, and that's your traditional trades in automotive. And then we touch on post-trade. So existing workforce that have finished their apprenticeship, there's a few products that we offer in terms of upskilling them.
Yeah. Okay. Now, the institute. I mean, Queensland. Obviously, it's a huge geographically. It's huge. The trainers are dotted around to provide coverage, but I know that there's talk of MTA Institute is based in South Brisbane. We've got a very impressive workshop that you use for some training here, but there's expansion on the horizon, right? So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that.
100%. So the delivery model that we sort of subscribe to and industry has accepted and really like is the workplace. So we do a lot of training in the workplace. With that is challenges. So the traditional apprenticeship where, mechanics did all types of work, some workshops don't cover the scope of work that we need to fulfill the requirements under the apprenticeship. So for example, if you've got a business that doesn't do major repairs, they focus on maintenance, servicing, and then all of a sudden, and this is a lot of businesses, there's an engine rebuilds required. They sort of go, okay, I'll get a remanufactured one or an exchange one. So they're not really taking deep dives into rebuilding of componentry anymore. So what that challenge for us is, if we're teaching apprentices about the ins and outs of pulling things apart, measuring, testing, and rebuilding, so for example, an engine, the students aren't getting that exposure. So what we need to do is simulate that environment for the student. So what we are planning is across the state to have some physical presence where we can withdraw students for a short period of time. We're not going to be the traditional block release, 7 weeks, 5 weeks, whatnot. It'll be short, sharp training. So we'll withdraw a student for 2 or 3 days and we'll just focus on engines. What that means is the student gets the experience, exposure they need. The employers aren't losing the students for an extended period of time, but we're able to fulfill that requirement in terms of exposing the student to different areas and different units of competence. So there's a feasibility study on it on the way now. So we're looking at Townsville. Interesting, Townsville is considered the hub for North Queensland. Clearly, Queensland is quite broad and sparse, but we'll start in Townsville and then proof of concept, and then we'll look at different areas, so further north, further south, because there's industry spread all East Coast, and obviously we've got a bit heading west as well. So the idea is to have a physical presence, a workshop where students can come, trainers can come, they can withdraw the students and can do 3 or 4 day blocks or 2 day blocks or even 1 day blocks where they get a deep dive into whatever subjects they're looking at in terms of their training plan. That gives us the capability to also provide additional training opportunities that we offer here in Brisbane, but we don't necessarily have capability in the regions. One of those would be electric vehicle training. Another one's air conditioning training. There's other types of training that we could provide in the regions similar to what we do here in Brisbane.
Yeah, okay. Well, you touched on electrification now, or EVs. So I might just leap ahead and just ask a couple of things about that. So electrification, it's the biggest tech training challenge for the industry across all sectors. I mean, it's not, obviously we talk about electric vehicles and we think of terms of, well, mechanics going to have to turn their minds to that. But I mean, other sectors have got to deal with it too, right? Paint and panel and everybody else has got to think about, okay, we've got a high voltage thing coming in. We've got to think about how we're going to deal with that. So
absolutely,
electrification, it's the big thing that's happened in recent years that everybody's got to be trained up on and think about.
So that, interesting when we say it's new. It is new, particularly full electric vehicle, but we've had hybrids for many years.
Of course.
Which has sort of given us a bit of lead time in terms of industry adjusting and learning and gaining skills and knowledge on how to manage the high voltage. But certainly we haven't seen the volume of electric vehicles as we have in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
Different manufacturers are coming to market. We know that there's different countries providing lots of different options in electric vehicles. What that means is certainly the service and maintenance needs to be addressed, but certainly the repairs, particularly the collision industry, the windscreen industry, the tyres. So they've all had to adjust the way they do business in terms of skilling, in terms of people, in terms of equipment. So there's training products out there. So we've been in market with the EV training for many years, probably I'd say 2015, 2016. So we started with hybrids, then evolved into electric vehicle training. And the manufacturers do training very well.
Yeah.
They provide, their tech training, which is amazing. Our industry is not purely the OEM and the dealers. We do have aftermarket. So we're really servicing that aftermarket part of our industry, which is most of our members, most of industry that aren't linked to an OEM. So there's been certainly an evolution in the training products from, really early on from hybrids now to full electric vehicles and lots of different variations. So the challenge is for industry is how do we deal with these vehicles? And certainly if they don't have access to OEM training or factory training, they rely on people like ourselves to deliver the training they need for their people.
So those aftermarket, those small independent workshops and paint and panel shops and so on, what sort of level of training do they need to be looking at initially? Is it just the turn off, turn on, or depower stuff, or is it a full?
That's an absolute. The minimum requirement is depower.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what you're doing with the vehicle. The idea is to make it safe so you can conduct your business, whether that's a panel repair, whether that's a mechanical repair. If you're seeing that battery pack and the orange cables, certainly there's a risk there. So we recommend that a depower is absolute minimum for people to start working on vehicles. Then depends on if it's associated with the electric vehicle, the electric motor, inverters, battery packs, then that's another layer of training. So there is skill sets. So there's a diagnose and repair skill set, which is a number of units clustered together into a skill set. And the target audience for that is existing techs that need to be upskilled in the electric vehicle side of things. But to your question, everyone should be doing depower. That is a minimum requirement. It's even, people who are the logistics around moving electric vehicles. So for example, tow truck drivers, breakdown services, and anyone from that point to repairs, whether it's directly electric vehicle repairs or subsequent repairs around paint or panel, a depower is an absolute minimum.
So that level and then the slightly higher level and the upskilling, that's all stuff that MTA Institute delivers.
Yep.
So now I do know that an apprenticeship, an electric vehicle apprenticeship's now been ticked off. The government's ticked that off, and that's now something that is being delivered.
Correct.
So MTA Institute is
So we've got a number of enrolments in that pure a Cert 3 or an apprenticeship on electric vehicles.
Okay.
Interestingly, if you look at a light vehicle apprenticeship and electric vehicle apprenticeship, 50% is the same, right? So we've still got wheels, we've got tyres, we've got brakes, we've got suspension, we've got body panels, we've got low voltage, 12-volt systems, etc. So the apprenticeship, is 50% the same. Then obviously you with electric vehicles, you're starting to deal with obviously not internal combustion engines. We're dealing with battery packs, charging, inverters, electric motors, etc. So yes, there is an apprenticeship purely for the workplace that doesn't see internal combustion engines, because the issue was at the start when we had, and I'll name Tesla because they were first to market in terms of a manufacturer that only has electric vehicles. We had inquiries for their apprentices in 2017, 2018. And it was a makeshift apprenticeship where we sort of did light vehicle plus some electrical bits and pieces, but it wasn't fit for purpose. So this apprenticeship is for the manufacturer who has only electric vehicles. Interestingly, you can actually do a light vehicle apprenticeship and change some of the electives in terms of the units and do some electric vehicle training as well. So it's quite flexible for that. So for smaller workshops that see both, internal combustion engine and electric vehicles, certainly there's an opportunity to start embedding some of the units into the apprenticeship and then become dual qualified and do a second qualification after you finish your first.
Okay, that's interesting. So I was specifically going to ask that about. So if you're like a third year apprentice now, and you're suddenly seeing, oh, there's an EV apprenticeship. What should I be doing if EVs are going to be a big thing, and I'm doing just a standard light vehicle? What should I be doing? What should they be doing?
I think we know that internal combustion engines not going anywhere fast. So I'd suggest finish your normal apprenticeship and then look at doing the electric vehicle as a dual qualification. The state does fund dual qualifications, so you're not disadvantaged that you do one qualification paid by the state and then you go, oh no, I need to fork out of my own pocket. They do fund dual qualification. So I'd say if you're an existing apprentice, maybe talk to your training provider, whether it's MTA or the public provider or whatever, and say, hey, can I do some electric vehicle electives within my normal light vehicle apprenticeship? And then once you finish your apprenticeship, then you can engage the RTO again and do a dual qualification. And you've already done a little bit of electric vehicle training. So you're probably, if you're a light vehicle apprentice and finish your apprenticeship today and have done some EV training, you potentially could start an electric vehicle qualification and you're almost a third year based on all the stuff you've done in the light vehicle qualification and some of the EV stuff. So it won't take another 4 years. You might be able to do it in 2 years, for example. And that'll vary based on the amount of work you've seen, the exposure, and obviously the individual capabilities.
Okay, so that would mean that you would have your certificate, your piece of paper saying, I am also an electric vehicle technician. Correct. But from what I understand you were saying earlier, you can have the electives in your standard light vehicle or whatever apprenticeship you're doing and be qualified to work on EVs, just not have that piece of paper.
Correct. Okay. So there's skill sets and there's a depower unit. So you can safely and competently work on electric vehicle if you do the units that are required under the apprenticeship. So you can absolutely have the skills and knowledge to do that.
Okay. So the other thing, the other big thing I think that over the last few years is the development of ADAS, advanced driver assistance systems, right? So computerization and all the cameras and LiDARs and all that. So training again, I know that repairers have got to be on top of that too. So again, something that MTA Institute.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been on our radar. We've partnered with experts in the field. So that was in the earlier days. So interestingly, you talk about the EVs becoming more common in marketplace. Actually, ADAS, so all this technology is in entry-level vehicles now. So what that means is it's not a specialist thing that only Euro cars have in terms of cameras and all the other tech. We're seeing $26,000 brand new vehicles have the technology. What that means is actually becoming part of the apprenticeship. So we're looking at and there's some development around ADAS units of competence that sit within the apprenticeship. So right now there's 1 unit of competence in the whole training package, which seems absurd that there's only 1 unit, but that unit's an awareness about understanding a little bit about ADAS. So now the people who look after the automotive training package, Osmasa, they're scoping out more units of competence. So how to service, diagnose cameras and radars and LiDARs, etc. So there's going to be a deeper suite of training packages that we can offer as part of the apprenticeship. So we see it now when dealer apprentices come in, they're already dealing with some of the stuff around ADAS. It's a day-to-day task now. So we're going to expedite that development of those qualifications and units and implementation and offer that as part of our apprenticeship suite. It doesn't have to be full ADAS, but 1 or 2 units, a bit like the electric vehicle, depower, some awareness, some understanding, and then it's the same with ADAS. And depends on the depth that the business wants to go into, how much ADAS training they get. So they could take quite a deep dive. But at the moment, it sort of sits outside the apprenticeship, but we see it as part of the apprenticeship in the very near future.
Yeah, wow. Which I guess, so when we look at, you might be a 25, 26-year-old qualified 3 or 4 years ago, and then and none of this stuff was part of your apprenticeship then, but you've got another 35, 40 years potentially in the industry. You got to play catch up, right? So you got to upskill to be on top of all this stuff. Again,
so there's different ways that industry do it.
Yeah.
There's the early adopters.
Yeah.
That, we have people saying, oh, we need hydrogen training. So, well, we haven't seen hydrogen, but they're the early adopters. So the ones that are proactive have done the EV training in 2018, 2019, 2020. They almost have to come back because they did it so long ago because they were early adopters, just for a refresher. Then you've got the catch up, and that's probably harder. So, as a training provider, sounds like I'm trying to, spruik the training.
Of course.
However, it's lifelong learning is our and should be industry's opinion or methodology, because the minute you stop is you start falling behind. And we see this with the technology, particularly in the last, we've talked about EVs and ADAS. That's been revolutionary in the last 10 years. So it's been a phenomenal shift from, traditionally mechanical, then some electrical, electronic, but this stuff is, if you're not on top of it, you will fall behind. It is harder to catch up. So if you can get in early, absolutely get in as early as you can and just keep on topping up. So you're a technician, don't stop because your apprenticeship has finished. That's actually the start of your trade. So just keep on topping up. Just keep on topping up. You don't have to go to night school. There's an opportunity to do, a few courses every year just to keep on top of the technology and that what that does is obviously gives you confidence and competence. So when a vehicle does turn up, you sort of own that space and go, I've got some knowledge, I've got some skills. I'm going to have a good crack at this, and that's good, and that's for business owners as well. Because the alternative is, if you don't upskill your people, you're going to rely on other businesses to do that work, and that's fine. In some cases, that's a business model where they say we don't do this type of work. We'll engage external contractors, but yeah, and with the change in the car park with electric vehicles, the more you sublet, the less you're going to be doing. So there's a point where, your relevance might be questioned. So keep upskilling, try to keep as much as you can within in-house where possible. But yeah, I understand that sometimes that's not a possibility based on investment on, for example, ADAS, big investment in training and equipment. You may want to sublet that, but as it becomes more regular, you'd probably have to consider, why am I subletting this where I can potentially do it in-house, skilling and equipment and finances permitting.
Yeah. Obviously, we've been sort of focusing on the sort of light vehicle workshop, but this what we're talking about is across all 100%. Sectors, right? From agricultural to paint panel to motorcycles. Well, motorcycles, maybe not quite so much.
Motorcycles have got some driver assist, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
They're quite, they're as high tech as the light vehicles. And, the poor farmers, the agricultural, the old tractors, they're as high tech as any vehicle.
Absolutely.
GPS tracking, all the tech that's involved in that, safety features, as well as, they're talking autonomous, there is autonomy. So, all the stuff in light vehicle, again, we get stuck into this because that's majority of what we see, but all of the areas are being affected by the technology. So motorcycles, ag, heavy, plant and whatnot. Even, I was watching a podcast the other day, or listening to a podcast, and they were talking about paint coatings now having some kind of ability to, a bit like a panel, like a solar panel, have some.
Oh, yeah.
So they're basically saying that, within the paint itself, the paint will have an ability to generate with the sun, generate some energy. So, the poor old spray painter that, thinks he could mix up a bit of paint, all of a sudden they're dealing with this tech as well. So it's not just the mechanical trade, it's the collision trade, it's the refinishing, it's cross industry. You really need to be on top of your game, particularly while it's in concept now. In 3 or 4 years, it'll be commonplace. So, you need to keep your finger on the pulse, how industry is evolving. Otherwise, you will get left behind.
Okay. So one thing that I think probably a lot of people that think about automotive training is, anybody that wants to engage and think about any product that they want to take on is cost. So if you're a small, an independent workshop or a small business and you want to take on an apprentice in Queensland, what is the cost to you if you want to do such a thing? And if I'm assuming that there's some government funding that you can rely on, but could you kind of talk us through that?
So if you're a small business and you want to engage in an apprentice, certainly there's a few subsidies and incentives that both the state and the federal government provide. So there's a federal incentive that the employer receives for engaging, putting on an apprentice. It's a startup and a completion, I believe, in terms of a straight incentive payment. But the training is subsidised by the state government. So, like I started off in the interview, was around, how do we where do we sort of fit in the food chain? So the state government has preferred suppliers, preferred RTOs. So that's your public providers, your industry providers, your private. They fund us to deliver training on their behalf. So for the employer, the investment is probably time. So there's not a financial cost. You don't get charged for training, nor does the apprentice. The government at the moment is paying for, there's a nominal fee, that tuition fee that the student used to pay. Since COVID, that's been covered by the state government, and it's 2025 and they're still covering those fees. So there's no physical out-of-pocket expenses. The investment is in time. So, if you put an apprentice on, you certainly need to release them to do their training. And that's normally, or that's during productive work hours. So that'll happen between, if it's the 9 to 5, 8 till 4, whatever that looks like, training needs to occur. So the only cost is the fact that you need to release the apprentice for training.
Okay, and for sort of upskilling types of training, I'm assuming that's looked at slightly differently?
It is. So there's some subsidies for example, the EV course. The government has a small subsidy, but it'll fall under a fee-for-service arrangement, which means that the individual or the employer will pay a fee, for example, for air conditioning course or an electric vehicle course or an ADAS course. There are some subsidies, but majority is under fee-for-service, where there's an investment by the employer or the student directly.
Okay. So if an employer, if a business is looking to take on an apprentice, what's the sort of steps that they should be taking?
So there's a few ways to skin it, but ultimately to engage in an apprenticeship model, you need to, they're called an ACAP. They're Australian support providers, but they're federally funded. You ring them, it'll be people like MEGT, MAS, Busy at Work. There's a few providers, and they basically engage in the contractual. So it's an Australian apprenticeship. It's a contract with the Australian government, and you engage in an apprenticeship. At that point, they'll come out to the workplace. As an employer, you potentially could have had this person working as a casual or as a TA, so you can get a sense of, is this the right fit? Or you could say, hey, I'm starting an apprentice on this day, and have the ACAP come in and do an apprenticeship sign up. From that point, you decide on who the training provider is. So they'll have a list of, say, for example, we'll go to light vehicle. They'll have a list of light vehicle training providers in the state, and you'll make a selection. Typically, if we've been in market for a long time, it'll be a repeat. You normally get a repeat provider in terms of, hey, we want MTA Institute to come and do our training. It might be the public provider, it could be TAFE, whatnot. Then you'll choose your training provider. From that point on, the training provider will make an appointment and start talking about the training side of things. So first step is engage an ACAP to sign up the apprenticeship, the contract.
On the surface, that doesn't sound terribly difficult to do, but is there a lot of paperwork? I mean, is it quite a simple process, or is it a lot of paperwork to
there's a bit of
going?
Paperwork. So and that's where the ACAP does, earn their living in terms of facilitating all that. So as a business owner, it's a couple of hours to, because they'll need, your business names and bits and pieces, account details and whatnot. But yeah, it is a bit administrative, but that's the front end. Once that's done, it's pretty much just the training part. But it's all facilitated by the ACAP, the provider. So as an employer, it's probably a couple of hours out of your day, and it's signed up, etc.
Yeah. So now, what about we just looked at that from the business side of the owner's side of things. If you are a young person, well, not necessarily a young person, but younger person than us, presumably, for sure. And you want to get an apprenticeship, what's Are you aware of the steps that you take?
So we sort of support that journey with those pre-employment students that we speak about. So there's the direct approach where you go to your local area where you live, or the area you want to go into, whether you're a motorcycle mechanic or a spray painter, panel beater, and you approach the businesses directly and say, hey, I'm looking for employment. So that's a direct approach, and that can be successful. The other approach is to do some pre-employment training. So in terms of a pre-vocational course or a short course in the area that you're interested in, that always looks good on your resume or your CV.
Sure.
So you turn up and say, hey, I've done a course with MTA. It was 5 weeks. It was an introduction to automotive. We did, a bit of safety, a bit of environment, a little bit of servicing. All of a sudden, if I was an employer looking at 2 candidates and one turned up with a pre-employment had done a pre-employment product, I'll be going, oh, these guys have, shown some initiative, done some training, will probably bring some skills to the table. So, it's always advantageous. So start off direct approach if you want, do a pre-employment program. That's always useful as well. So, and then there's always the job active providers who are people who you'll engage with, and they can help you look for employment as well.
So there's really no substitute. If you're a young person and you're keen, knock on some doors.
That's the good place to start.
Yeah.
And the beauty of that is, you get to choose your employer to an extent. Obviously, they'll make a recruitment decision, but you go, hey, I want to be in this area. I want to work on motorcycles. I live in this area. I can get this area. So you start thinking about your logistics. How are you going to get to work? Where do I want to work at? Which employer do I want? Do I want a big brand, Ducati or Moto Guzzi or something like that, or I'm happy with another provider? So by all means, door knock, and you can actually choose your journey. If you're not that way inclined, certainly there's other mechanisms in terms of job agencies and pre-employment. So with our pre-employment programs, MTAQ run a lot of job placement, employer network sessions. So you come here for 5 weeks. During that period, you'll be introduced to many employers who are gainfully looking for apprentices. So that's probably the benefit of doing some pre-employment training is with MTA Institute, we're connected to the peak body, MTAQ, and we make those connections to industry, which other providers may do, but we definitely connect students to employers.
Yeah. Now it's been the case in recent, certainly in recent years, but I'm gathering that might be have changed slightly with some cost of living pressures and so on, but that businesses, automotive industry, is screaming for apprentices and skilled staff, take people on. Is that still that is changing slightly, as if I understand it right? Is it plateauing a bit, or
so apprenticeship numbers in terms of enrolments for the institute, they sort of slowed down end of December,
right?
But started January to now, it's quite reasonable, back to our normal. But in terms of the apprenticeships, certainly that the employers have, that bucket's been filled since COVID 2020. We saw quite a 50% increase in apprentices. What employers are looking for now is the skilled workforce. So upskilling their existing workforce and skilled. So the pipeline's coming through. So the apprenticeships are working. That's a long burn. So that's a 4-year apprenticeship. A few more years, then you've got a skilled tradesman. They're calling for skilled tradespeople now, right. And that's where we can help with upskilling. But certainly, it's a numbers game. So it is proven to be a challenge to get skilled tradespeople in industry. The pipeline stuff is working. MTAQ is, and the institute, we run a lot of school programs. So where we obviously realise that there's a limited labour pool in terms of, there's X amount of students that come out of school every year. How do we get a piece of that pie? So we're engaging with schools pretty heavily to in terms of an attraction, a proposition to come into automotive. But again, that's pipeline stuff. That's a slow burn. That'll happen over 5 to 10 years. But the here and now is we need skilled people.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we've talked about in the past. It's been talked about the immigration process.
Skilled migrants. Yep.
Skilled migration. That's so. obviously that's a thing, and people are keen to do that. I would guess.
They are,
Is there, when a skilled migrant comes over, is that are they literally ready to go, or do they have to come through like someone like the Institute just to be checked, or how does it?
So there's some recognition of their current competencies and skills.
Right.
So and the challenge is every country has a different training arrangement. So there's some countries that have diploma in automotive, which is way higher than our Cert 3. But in actual fact, there's no alignment with the levels. So a diploma in automotive here, we don't actually have a diploma in automotive, but that would be like a master tech. That'll be someone who's top of their game in terms of automotive. We'd call that a diploma in automotive. But the diploma of automotive, it comes from other countries. Probably like a third-year apprentice, to be honest.
Yeah, right.
And that's not every country. Some of them that come over as, I can use the UK, for example. They use city and guilds. They come over, the Germans come over with their qualifications, and they are equivalent to ours plus some. So when that recognition process comes for skilled migration, those type of countries will come through pretty confident that if they're a qualified person in South Africa, UK, Germany, they're going to come across with the skills equivalent to what we've got in local market. Some of the other countries, you probably have to do a skills assessment and determine what upskilling is required to get to our standard of a qualified person.
Yeah, okay. All right. So now I'm going to ask a couple of personal questions now.
Okay.
Now, you're the director of a major training organisation.
Yeah.
That's not how you didn't just start that at the beginning of your career. You didn't walk into this job. You started
100%.
somewhere. So
Yeah.
I'm curious for those young people that might be watching or listening and thinking, where can I'm really interested in being a mechanic, but I think I might want to go further than that. So perhaps you might just talk us through your own career, because I know that you were an apprentice at one time.
100%.
And why should a young person consider an automotive career? Where can they go? What trajectories can they take?
Yeah, so mine. So it was interesting because as a kid, I liked pulling things apart, right? So I was always working my hands. They didn't necessarily go back together again. Early stages, there was lots of things went apart and they ended up in a pile. And it's like, okay, well, I know how to pull things apart. The next level was putting them back together. And then did they necessarily run? That's questionable as well. So I played with push bikes and lawnmowers and all types of things like that. So I had an affinity with working my hands and understanding how things work. So I was quite interested in sort of the physics of, how does a motor work, how does that gear set work, etc. And that sort of led me down to probably mechanical's not a bad path. So ultimately went and did an apprenticeship. I sort of moved around a bit with my apprenticeship, and if you can, I'd suggest if you've got the opportunity as an apprentice to move around to a couple of different workplaces, not saying leave your workplace, but saying if you can go to a dealership, they do stuff, they've got systems in place, they've got the tools, they've got the equipment, they've got the processes, they've got the support. So that's perfect world stuff in a dealership. Then I worked in a small garage when it was just me and the mechanic, and we didn't have a lot of special stuff. We just make did. So, that teaches you a different skill set, how to think around and a bit of problem solving. And certainly, the working in a sort of medium-sized workshop, you get to learn from other people as well. So don't ever discount peer learning in terms of your apprenticeship. It's not just about the training provider. It is about your employer and the places where you work. So I moved around a bit, did a little bit in a dealership, a little bit of small garage, started like as an apprentice as a Brisbane City Council. So and why I went to the Brisbane City Council was I liked their training, their business, because there was trucks, they had motorbikes, they had lawnmowers. So what that meant was that I got to move around a bit. So I did some work on buses, old Bedfords. I did some work on lawnmowers and whippersnippers and all types of things. So that was really engaging. So I quite enjoyed that. Then I ended up with light vehicle. And the problem for me was all their vehicles were quite new, so I felt like I wasn't learning. So at about third year, I sort of tapped out and said, I need some more stimulation. So I ended up in a small garage, which was fine. So after that, I did my apprenticeship, went out on the road and did some lube mobile. So that was a baptism. So all of a sudden, I didn't have a workshop. I didn't have my peers. I didn't have a supervisor. I was it. So, I was confronted with some challenges as a young technician. So I persevered for a couple of years doing that. That was a real learning, and I still had support of the organisation. Now I'm trying to think now. It's been so long ago. I'll have to look at my CV. So I did a bit of work in the field, and then I ended up in a dealership for a couple of years at a Nissan dealership. It was Metro Nissan at the time. They're still there at Windsor. So I did a few years there. That was really beneficial. Then I I moved on, and then I settled for about 10 years, and it was a research and development company around automotive. So, I'm going to give away my age soon, but in the 90s, we started getting a lot of fuel injection. So there was a real skills gap in industry about the electronic fuel injection system. So what the organisation did, the company I worked for, Electrijet, 10 years, we sat down, we plugged into vehicle computer systems, so transmission controls, engine controls, and just sucked data out and recorded data, and we put it in a library. And so technician can go, oh, this car, what's the operating parameters for this vehicle? Look up your vehicle, and the data was there. So I actually learned, in that 10 years, really learnt what a car was about, how everything ticked. Before that, it was like, servicing, maintenance, mechanical stuff. But that R&D position really set me up in terms of training, because that 10 years, while I was doing that, we were very proficient in that area. So we actually provided training to industry around diagnosing and repairing fuel injection systems. So that was all the 90s. And I actually quite enjoyed teaching. But in terms of career prospects, so that job was research and development. So I got to play with cars. I got to sit in an air-conditioned office, learned a lot of computer skills, drawing wiring diagrams and a lot of computer skills, a lot of learning around that space. So that was a skill set that I sort of learnt. But that got me to China, Taiwan, a few countries. So that was just a humble mechanic, and I'm starting to sort of diversify or see the opportunity. So I got to go to Asia. Then a training opportunity came up with MTA, early 2000s, and I thought, I like teaching, because I was doing it as part of this other role, and it was quite fulfilling because I enjoyed the buzz of imparting knowledge and going, oh, I get it, oh, excellent. So that was very fulfilling for me. So I thought I'd get into teaching. So 2003 started with MTA as a field trainer, did that for about 10 years or so. After 10 years, sort of transitioned from the field into research and development, or L&D, learning development. So I started writing the textbooks the students use to learn, and also all the quizzes and questions they need to sort of answer so I was writing the resources with another gentleman, John Branch. Did that for a few years. Then still with MTAQ, went and did a bit of business development work. So I really got to understand training and got to understand the automotive business that MTAQ was sort of involved in. So I started doing a bit of business development. That was a couple of years doing business development. I enjoyed that because it was an easy sell, because I really believed in the product, as in what we did as the institute. Come out to the workplace, we do one-on-one training. So it was a really easy sell. So, if you're a business development person with a good product, it wasn't really hard work. It was really engaging with industry and telling them the benefits about, having our trainers come out and talk to your apprentices one-on-one in the majority of cases. So did that for a few more years, still with Institute. I flipped over to MTAQ, picked up another state government contract around industry skills advice. So what that meant was government came to MTAQ for advice around skilling, workforce, etc. So that was again another opportunity for me to, from knuckle dragging, grease monkey, I'd get in my suit and go in the city and meet with government officials around and provide advice about our industry, right? And that industry inform them in terms of spending and some of the training products that they'd subsidised and some of the products that we see today. So that was another thing that you said to me, John, as a English as a second language apprentice, I'll be going, nah, I probably had aspirations to have a business as some of my own. But yeah, that's opened up the door into a sort of the corporate world. After that, in 2022, there was an organisational restructure, and I was put in the position of the MTA Institute director. So certainly that was a quite a significant shift in my role, because all of a sudden the buck stopped with me. Prior, there was always someone else. There was always a director or a general manager. Now that was me. It was like, yeah, it was a realization there was significant amount of responsibility. And, it was an honor, because there is a lot of students and a lot of trainers and a lot of industry that, certainly rely on us as a team and myself to do the right thing and provide the skills and knowledge that the industry needs. So that's been a couple of years now. I'm probably a little bit grayer. I'll keep it short now. But no, in all honesty and seriousness, it's been a real career development for me. Again, to be, it's funny because my son goes, "Oh, you're the principal." Well, I'm not a school teacher, but you're the principal. It's like, well, yeah, that's sort of, if you put it in school speak. So that's really an honor for me. And I take it very seriously.
Of course.
And particularly with, the volume of students that we look after and industry and the volume of people that we look after in terms of staff, it's a big responsibility. And, I'll have a strong team around me and good support from the board. But yeah, it's quite a journey from, working on my pushy in the shed, breaking things, to, running a fairly significant training operation.
Yeah. When you look back, can you believe that journey and where you've
No,
ended up?
I didn't plan it.
Yeah, of course.
I always thought potential some business ownership or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I couldn't have mapped it out, to be honest. So I always had aspirations to better myself and do better, but I don't think I could have mapped out this journey.
So, I mean, that's a really good example of where someone can go, that you start off thinking, I want to tinker with engines.
Yep.
30 years later, or however long it's been, don't date yourself. This is where you end up. You're running this really large organization and so on. So for young people out there, it's not just a case of, my career is going to be just tinkering with an engine. There are all sorts of avenues and pathways open to you.
Absolutely. And, whether that's in education, whether that's business ownership, whether that's a leadership, certainly the auto industry is an international industry. Yeah. So, that does open opportunities for travel. I see lots of stories around apprentices that work for a manufacturer, for example, a global manufacturer, who become master technicians here, who can travel easily around the world and pick up a gig because they've got that accreditation. So certainly as an industry, it is an international industry, and there's lots of opportunities. You can map your journey and say, hey, I want to be there. Or sometimes if you go along with the ride, it can take you places where you wouldn't think you could potentially reach. So
yeah. And if I just before we wrap up, if I just perhaps I should have asked this earlier, but we think a lot. Most people think, I guess, when you're not involved in the industry, that workshops are just horrible descriptives, but kind of dirty, greasy sort of places.
Yeah,
but
that perception.
That's the perception. But actually, and going forward, when we're talking about electrification and ADAS and computer skill, those are the skills. They're not the traditional skills. You'll still need those traditional skills, but it's not. This other stuff is needed.
100%. That descriptive of dirty, greasy. That certainly is a thing of multiple decades ago. Nowadays, so we're really excited about what we're doing at the institute here at the MTAQ building. We've got a technology hub which is going to be air conditioned, high tech, which is normal. That's normal practice in industry these days. Honestly, there is some of that dirty stuff which is inevitable. So if you're working on trucks and stuff, there's a bit of that dirty part, but there's also a very clean environment. So one of the things with these pre-employment students that come through to inspire them. It's like, you know, maybe when I was an apprentice, the first thing I pick up is a spanner. The first thing apprentices pick up now is a computer, to be honest. So a car comes in or a truck comes in, or they've got to, you know, analyze the state of play, see where the vehicle's at. So it is vastly different to what when I started, but also the perceptions. So that's our challenge as an industry body and as industry people is, hey, automotive isn't what mums and dads potentially think, that perception. It's far more advanced than the general public potentially knows.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming along today and being part of Motoring Chronicles. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Appreciate the time. Cheers.
Cheers.